The purpose of speedrunning with splits is to be able to compare the current run to one or more previous ones. LiveSplit is the most common splits program speedrunners use today. I didn't fully understand how to read a LiveSplit timer until well after I started using one, so this may interest any speedrun enthusiasts with questions. To be clear, this video will not cover how to use LiveSplit, it will only cover how to read and understand LiveSplit. A few terms to begin. PB means personal best, which is the best time the runner in question has ever gotten in a full run. The current comparison is what times LiveSplit is comparing the current run to, which can be a runner's PB, latest run, or other things. Segments are the separate sections of a run that LiveSplit demarcates with splits. Colloquially, split can also be used to mean segment, as in I played very well that split versus I played very well that segment. Splits can also be used more generally to refer to everything shown in the LiveSplit window. Gold refers to a best segment, which we'll discuss later. Let's start off with a basic LiveSplit layout containing only the most common data components and arranged in a common way, and I'll use my Twilight Princess 100% splits as an example. Note that LiveSplit is very customizable, so it's possible to include exactly this information, but in a totally different arrangement. The top shows the game and category being run. Down near the bottom, we see the main timer that shows how long the current run has been going on. This is usually larger than the rest of the text on LiveSplit and hard to miss. Below that is the segment timer, which shows how long the current segment has been going on. Put another way, this is how long ago the last split was. In the main section, we have the splits. Each row indicates a point in the run that I will press a button to make LiveSplit remember the times currently on the main and segment timers. The left column says what each split queue is. I'll split when I get the slingshot, when I save Tallow, when I meet Zelda, etc., all the way down to Ganondorf at the end. My splits always show the final split no matter where I've scrolled to, but not everyone has it set that way. My left column also includes an icon relevant to each split. These are just decorative. The right column says what times I split at during my current comparison, which I currently have set to be my PB. Thus, the time shown in the final segment, which here is Ganondorf, is the length of my PB, 6, 17, 18. Just to the left of that, the middle column will show how far ahead of or behind my current comparison I am, with negative meaning ahead and positive meaning behind. For example, my slingshot split in my PB was at 5 minutes and 35 seconds. If I start my splits, and then split immediately for it, then the middle column will show negative 5 minutes and 33 seconds, because I split 5 minutes and 33 seconds earlier than the current comparison's time of 5 minutes and 35 seconds. Note also that the time in the right column changed to my split time for the current run once I split, but the future splits still show the times from my current comparison. Regarding current comparison, most people compare against their PB all the time, but LiveSplit allows for comparing against other things, including the latest run, best split times, average segments, and more. It is possible to add text labeling the comparison column, but if the columns don't have a label, you can either assume the comparison is to PB, or you can ask the runner, who will likely be happy to tell you the answer. Finally, the very bottom of the splits show the sum of best segments, which is often referred to as sum of best, or sum of bests, or abbreviated to SOB. Unless I undo a split or don't save my splits when closing them, LiveSplit will keep track of every split I do, whether it's in a PB or not. I can export these data and see them in a spreadsheet if I want to. LiveSplit uses these data to keep track of the best I've ever done for each segment individually, and these are my best segments. The sum of best, then, is the sum of my best segments for each split in the run. Put another way, if I play as fast as I've ever done on every segment individually in one run, then my final time will match my sum of best. This, of course, is unlikely in most cases, but is a number runners often like to keep track of. As I mentioned earlier, best segments are often referred to as golds, because a common setting is to have LiveSplit display best segments in a gold color, and for brevity, I will refer to best segments as golds for the remainder of this video. Let's now look at my full splits layout and recognize the elements we've just discussed. The game and category are up top. The splits are below that, though there is an extra column that I'll explain momentarily. Below that is some more information, including but not limited to the sum of best. Now let's check out the things we didn't discuss in the simple layout earlier. In the splits, the columns are labeled PB, SOB, and time. The PB and time columns are exactly what I showed in the simple layout, the comparison between the current run and my PB, and the time of the split in question. The SOB column is a second comparison, and it compares to my sum of best cumulatively. The plus 10.9 on the slingshot segment, for example, means that my current run's slingshot segment was 10.9 seconds slower than my best segment for the slingshot segment. On the tallow segment, I saved 0.3 seconds compared to my best segment, which adds on to my previous time loss in this column to yield plus 10.6. I like having the SOB comparison because it helps me keep track of how well I'm doing compared to my best segments. Viewers often care more about how well I'm doing compared to my PB, though, so I use both columns. The colors used for split comparisons also vary. Using green to indicate being ahead and red to indicate being behind is nearly ubiquitous, though there are exceptions. It's also very common for light green to indicate being ahead but not as far ahead as the previous split, and light red to indicate being behind but not as far behind as the previous split. Best segments are often colored gold, hence the name, though rainbow is also commonly used, and I've seen blue and green used as well. The term golds is so commonplace, however, that I personally refer to my best segments as golds even though I use rainbow for them on my splits. Down below the timer is possible time save. This is the difference between the current segment's length in the current comparison and the current segment's gold. This represents the amount of time I'll save versus my PB if I play equally to the best I've ever done during this segment. Best possible time, despite the name, is not some kind of theoretical cap on how low the world record for a speedrun can go. Best possible time is equal to the sum of best plus the amount of time lost to gold segments so far in the run. I have a column for this, so we can see that my sum of best plus the most recent entry in the SOB column equals the best possible time. Put another way, if I play as fast as I've ever done on every segment individually from here on out in the run, then my final time will match my best possible time. Best possible time is also not pace. While the best possible time during the final segment of the run does give an estimate on what time the run could really finish with, the best possible time earlier on in the run doesn't represent a realistic time for a runner to achieve, assuming their best segments are truly representative of something near their best play. A more realistic way to use pace would be to assume the runner would continue to lose the same amount of time to their sum of best per amount of time in the run for the remainder of the run. For example, if I've lost 1 minute to my sum of best in the first half of the run, I might expect to lose 1 more minute over the second half. But this is obviously guesswork and laden with assumptions, so I tend not to use the term pace at all. The final component on my live split layout connects to speedrun.com to display the world record for the category. When LiveSplit can't connect to speedrun.com for any reason, this line will say unknown world record. However, it is also possible to simply write text manually within LiveSplit, and this can be used to display the world record in those cases. I'll now pull up a few different speedruns and narrate what I'm understanding as I read the splits. As we go, we'll see a few more auxiliary LiveSplit components that we didn't see on my splits. Here are Mini 352's splits. We see several familiar components, though not all in the same places as before. The game and category, the world record, the splits, the main and segment timers, the possible time save, and the best possible time. He's about 1 hour and 31 minutes into the run, and just over 3 minutes into the segment. His splits say he's comparing to his PB, so at the last split, he was 2 minutes and 29 seconds ahead of his PB, and he got a gold on his light arrows segment. There are just a few elements we haven't seen yet. Near the top, this 23 is his run counter, saying that he's finished 23 runs on these splits. Sometimes there will be a second number, which is the attempt counter, showing how many times the splits have been started, whether each run was finished or not. Down here, he has the times listed for the current segment's gold and its length in his PB. The difference between these two numbers is equal to the possible time save below. This is technically redundant, but it can be nice to have information shown in different ways. The previous segment line shows how much time Mini saved, or in this case lost, on the previous segment. The number before the slash shows how much time he lost to his PB in that segment, and the number after the slash shows how much time he lost to his gold in that segment. Finally, at the bottom of the splits, he has a graph. The graph isn't labeled, but we can assume it's displaying his current comparison to PB. This shows that he was behind his PB somewhat near the beginning of the run, but then steadily save time over the next part of the run. Note that live split graphs are sometimes flipped vertically, so check the numbers on the splits if you're unsure how the graph is oriented. These are Gymnast86's splits for a 3D Zelda challenge run. Again, we see the category, the run and attempt counter, PB and gold times for the current segment, the main and segment timers, splits, possible time save, best possible time, sum of best, and the world record. The only element here that we haven't seen already is sub-splits. Because Jim is playing 6 games in one speedrun, he wants to have splits within each game, but also show the times for the game as a whole after he's finished each one. Each game split, then, is like a folder of smaller splits. The times on the game splits indicate how far into the current game Jim is, and how long the entire game took in his PB. Subsplits can also be used in single-game speedruns, but are not very common in my experience. These are Anarakis' splits. They include many elements we've seen already, which I won't enumerate this time. He's nearly 3 hours and 10 minutes into his run, and about 7 minutes into the segment, but his splits comparisons and information show dashes instead of numbers. This is because the run he's comparing against doesn't have these splits, so LiveSplit is recording the current run's times but doesn't have anything to compare them to. I'll go over reasons this might happen later in the video. Anno has a graph like Mini did, but his is vertically flipped so that ahead is down and behind is up. Lastly, Anno uses graded splits. Graded splits graphically indicate the quality of the current run segments using these bars in place of split icons, and comparing against some thresholds the runner has set. For example, a runner might give 3 bars for a segment that is in the top 10% of their attempts of that segment, and 4 bars for a segment that is in the top 1%. We as viewers might not know how Anno has his thresholds set up, but we can see that he played better than his highest thresholds for water level 1 and 2 segments, but played worse on the Lakebed Temple and MDH segments. These are Skyrion's splits. He's around 2 minutes into his run and 15 seconds into the current segment, and is 0.3 seconds ahead of his current comparison, which I assume is his PB. He's finished 9 runs of this category on these splits. His best possible time is a 21:21, though that's about to change to a 21:20 as he golds this segment and lowers his sum of best. This best possible time is nearly a minute faster than his presumed PB, but he's still near the beginning of the run, so there's no telling what his final time will be. Because this game's community determines leaderboard times based on run times with loads removed, Sky has his main timer set to pause during loads, but he also has this real-time line that shows how much real time has elapsed since starting the run. If we wanted to, we could subtract his main timer from his real timer to find out how much time loads have taken so far. These are Orcrist splits. These look radically different because they're arranged horizontally to fit with his 16:9 game, but the information is all the same as examples we've seen already. He's playing Breath of the Wild Master Sword and Dungeons. He's about 48 minutes into his run and 6 minutes into the current segment, which is the highlighted Yiga Hideout segment. He's a minute and 27 seconds ahead of his comparison, which I assume is his PB, making 2 hours and 16 minutes his PB time. The other information we often see at the bottom of splits is over on the right instead. Having seen all that, let's go over some frequently asked questions and final notes. 2 people running the same category of the same game may split differently from each other. Splits aren't required for speedrunning, and the final time for the leaderboard for RTA runs is determined by the amount of time between whatever is considered the beginning of the run, like starting a new file, and whatever is considered the end of a run, like killing the final boss. The time on the splits does not matter for the leaderboard, nor does the content of the splits. People can split any way they like or not split at all. That said, runners often do split the same way as each other, because when they do, it becomes easier for them to compare their segments and find places they can improve. And sometimes there are small differences in split queues. When splitting for obtaining an item in Twilight Princess, for example, some people split on pressing A to open the chest, some on the item appearing, some based on the text box, and some based on the jingle that plays. As we saw earlier, a dash on splits means LiveSplit can't make the comparison or display the time for some reason. This will happen if the comparison is missing a split, because LiveSplit can't tell me how far ahead or behind a missing split I am. It also happens if I skip a split in the current run. Runners sometimes skip splits because they forget or fail to split or miss their split key or something like that, but sometimes people skip splits on purpose because something has made them reroute the segment they're on in such a way that comparing to another run would no longer be meaningful. For example, in Twilight Princess Any %, we intend to go to the Gorge, then get the Claw Shot, then get the Elden Vessel. If we fail a certain trick though, then we go get the Elden Vessel before getting the Claw Shot, which means that if we split for the Elden Vessel anyway, then we see a huge fake gold. In this case, we would instead skip splits until the normal route and our reroute merge, then resume splitting as normal. I mentioned earlier that there are several things a runner can choose to make LiveSplit compare the current run to. Some are other runs, like the runner's PB or latest run, or even someone else's run that the runner imported into their splits. Another option is to compare to all golds, like my SOB column, or to all average segments, mean or median, or all worst segments. Yet another option is to construct or have LiveSplit construct a theoretical run to run against. Choosing best split times means that the splits show the lowest time the main timer has ever shown when splitting for each segment. In other words, being ahead of best split times at any point means that the current run is the runner's fastest run ever. For the balanced PB option, LiveSplit keeps the final time the same as a runner's PB, but redistributes the time lost to golds over the run so that it's roughly evenly distributed, which means a runner can feel like they have time to save all over the place, even if their PB has only a few concentrated areas where they lost time. Finally, runners can simply write in split times to compare to, which can be useful for seeing whether a goal time might be achievable with the current run. LiveSplit gives the options to make comparisons cumulatively or segment by segment. In the example on the left, my SOB column adds together the time I lose to each segment's gold, and at the end of the run shows me the total time I lost to my golds. In the example on the right, Mini-Mini's best column shows how much time he loses or saves to each segment's gold individually. I personally have only ever seen segment-by-segment comparison used for a best segments column, and it's usually easy to tell when it's being used because all the negative numbers will be golds. Many runners also use splits when they practice segments outside of runs, and some runners choose to import their practice golds into their full run splits. Similarly, some speedruns have identical segments. For example, in Twilight Princess, the first segment of Any % is perfectly identical to the first segment in all dungeons, so a runner could decide to import their best time for that segment in one category as the gold for that segment in the other category. This is just a matter of personal preference and has no impact on runs or final time. LiveSplit can begin running with a positive or negative offset, which can be helpful for certain kinds of runs. The Wind Waker speedrunning community recently began allowing runners to skip the game's intro, but the length of the intro still counts towards the final time. Here, Aloha Kirby starts LiveSplit with a positive offset of 3 minutes and 37 seconds to account for the skipped cutscene. Again, the timer does not matter for the verified time on the leaderboard. This is just a way for the runner to keep track of their time for themselves. On the other hand, Twilight Princess individual level speedruns, or ILs, start timing upon taking control of Link after loading the file. So for those, I start LiveSplit with a negative offset to account for the length of the file load, so that I can press the button to start my timer at the same time I press the button to load the file, rather than trying to time starting my timer with the game's load. Most runners split by pressing a key on their keyboard. Some use their feet so that their hands can stay on the controller. Others use an auto-splitter, which is a program that watches the game feed and recognizes specific frames that the runner has taught it, then splits automatically when it sees those frames. Splits show raw numbers, and numbers can be interpreted differently by different people and depending on circumstances and in some cases, mood. For some people, a green number means the run is good, and that is that. For some runners though, a run has to be a certain amount ahead of their PB by a certain point in the run for them to think it's good, because they're worried they won't be able to play as well as they did in their PB for the remainder of the run. And there are many other cases. So, as a matter of courtesy, if a runner says, "This run sucks," it's okay to disagree, but it doesn't make much sense to argue. This should cover nearly everything you'll see on LiveSplit. If you have any remaining questions, feel free to ask in the comments and I'll answer them. Runners are also usually willing to answer questions during streams if you ask.